Nanzhi thought she had put on a book about raising children, relying on years of experience in watching survival in the wilderness. Every day, she would go up the mountain to catch rabbits and barbecue, go down the river to fish and cook soup, and diligently take care of her children. But who knew that days had just come? She thought she could have a second spring. The rumored husband who had died 800 times suddenly appeared, and so on. She seems to be wearing a male lead book. Nanzhi. Isn't that the canon fodder dowager? Penguin Exchange Group. 7976071226. Welcome everyone to join the group for communication keywords of the novel. No pop-ups when dressing as a villain's wife. No pop-ups when dressing as a villain's wife. Complete collection download for TXT, latest chapter reading when dressing as a villain's wife. Chapter 1. 3 Days of Hunger and 9 Meals. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. 3 Days of Hunger and 9 Meals. Mother, Auntie, the little doll over 3 years old crouched by the bed and called out to the woman with tightly closed eyes on the bed. When Nanzhi woke up, she happened to face that dirty little face. Looking at the crystal clear snot hanging in front of him, Nanzhi quickly dodged with excitement. The snot did not fall as expected, only saw the little doll sniff. The snot immediately retracted. The little doll looked at Nanzhi and woke up, with a hint of light in her eyes. Auntie, Auntie, you're awake. Upon hearing what the little doll said, Nanzhi's face was filled with fear. Who owns this little doll? Why are you still calling her auntie? She is still a yellow flower daughter who has been single for 18 years. Before she could ask out her doubts, she fainted again in front of her. Only the little doll remained bewildered. Remembering that my own aunt had not eaten much for 3 days, the little doll only turned around and ran away. He wants to go to the mountain. Yesterday, Stone Brother also picked up bird eggs on the mountain and came back. He also wants to search for them. Once he finds the bird eggs, he will bring them back to his mother to eat. When she woke up again, Nanzhi was already confused. Has she traveled through time? Is that messy little doll just her cheap son? Thinking of the over 10 agricultural texts on my mobile phone reading app bookshelf, I didn't know for a moment whether to laugh or cry. Although she is a seasoned reader of farming literature, God doesn't really need to send her to this territory. She just stayed up all night, shouldn't she have died suddenly? Nanzhi sat huddled together and stroked through the things in her mind. She instinctively wanted to button her head, but when she saw that there was still black mud between her dirty nails, she suddenly stopped her hand. After fainting just now, memories of the original owner slowly came to her mind. The territory she wears is a dynasty that has never been seen in history. The original owner was a small village aunt who was born and raised in the neighboring village. She had parents and 2 older brothers in her family. She got married in Lihua village and gave birth to that little baby who became an auntie. Her husband was skilled in hunting and was the only child in the family. Her parents-in-law were gentle and kind, and the family of 5 lived a happy life. The sky did not meet people's wishes. 3 years ago, the original owner's husband went up the mountain and said he would come back from hunting to nourish her body. However, he never returned. The village men went to the mountain together to search for 3 days, only bringing back a piece of tattered clothes. The clothes were torn, tattered, and covered in blood. Even if the body was not found, everyone knew that the young man from the Shen family was probably gone. Afterwards, their lives became difficult as their mother-in-law fell ill due to the loss of her only son, and their father-in-law accidentally fell while working in the field. The original owner took care of 2 elderly people and a few month-old child alone. Due to lack of labor and the need to treat their parents-in-law, they had to sell several acres of land to someone else. I persisted for over a year until my family could no longer afford to buy medicine for the 2 elderly people. My parents-in-law passed away, and in the end, the original owner could only borrow 1 or 2 silver coins from his mother's house to take care of the 2 elderly people's affairs. She lives with her own son, relying solely on the wild fruits and vegetables on the mountain. Some villagers used to see their orphans and widows pitiful and would send some food over, but now it has been 6 months without rain, and the crops in the fields are about to die from drought, making life difficult for anyone. By now, Nanzhi had run out of food for 3 days at home. Rubbing her empty belly, Nanzhi felt that the heavens were teasing her. Other travelers are either space or systems, some have a golden finger, and the least fortunate have parents to discuss. When she was good, she would starve 9 times in 3 days, give away a messy doll while traveling, and even be promoted from a yellow flower girl to a widow with a little drag bottle. After sorting out the original owner's memory, Nanzhi slowly got out of bed. She needs to find the dog. Dog is the nickname of the original owner's son, and there is a saying in the countryside that it is easy to support a lowly name. Coupled with the fact that the original owner's husband left early and was busy taking care of the elderly in the future, he had no intention of giving the child a proper name. The dog kept barking. Even standing at the entrance of the village shouting for dogs now, you can still hear 5 or 6 dolls agreeing. After leaving the courtyard gate, Nanzhi looked at his future base. The courtyard was square in all directions and was built with stone brick walls. On the left side of the entrance, there were 2 rooms for stacking miscellaneous items, separated by a dry toilet. Facing the courtyard gate was the main house, and on the left was the room of his parents-in-law. Now it is all empty, while on the right is her room. The backyard is a kitchen and a well, and there is also a small vegetable field. However, now it is all deserted. It seems that the original owner's family had a good life in the past, but unfortunately. Nanzhi shook her head and scooped up a bucket of water from the kitchen water tank before it could boil, only pouring it into her stomach with a gurgling sound. Even if you have some water in your stomach, it feels better than being empty. Just as I left the courtyard to find the dog, I saw an old lady rushing towards me. After thinking for a moment, Nanzhi was about to call someone when she was pulled by the old lady and ran towards the back mountain. "Oh, Miss Lin, hurry up and take a look at your dog. He's arguing with the Wu family's stone on the mountain." After hearing these words, Nanzhi swallowed what she wanted to say and ran up the mountain with Aunt Lu. Nanzhi, who was running with a stomach full of cold water, was gasping in her stomach. After finally reaching the back mountain, Nanzhi almost fainted after watching the scene. The dog, which was originally dirty, is now covered in mud, with a tight face and nosebleeds. Nanzhi's eyes turn red as he looks at it. "Dog!" Nanzhi shouted and quickly stepped forward to check if there was anything wrong with the dog. "Auntie!" The dog watched as his mother arrived, and his originally stiff face suddenly collapsed. The little doll over 3 years old couldn't hold it anymore, and with a loud cry, it made people's noses ache. While coaxing the dog, Nanzhi coldly glanced at the stone. Shir is 7 years old this year and is a child from Mr. Li's family next door. He looks tall and strong because he is 4 years older than the dog. He is still holding something in his hand and wants to hide it behind him. "Dog, don't cry. Tell Auntie, what's going on? Who hit you?" Nanzhi wiped her own cheap son's face. "It's him. It's the dog robbing me." Stone saw several adults staring at him and shouting loudly, his hands hiding behind him. Nanzhi looked at the calm Stone and asked, "Then tell me, what did my dog snatch from you? You are 4 years older than my dog. What can he snatch from you?" The stone instinctively shrank its neck, its face turning red and unable to say a word. Even if he is a small tyrant among the children, he is still afraid of adults. After seeing him like this, Nanzhi didn't understand anything and didn't even ask Shir. He just lowered his head and looked at his own son. "Dog, tell your mother, what happened?" Auntie has fallen." "Dog, come to the mountain, look for food, give it to Auntie." The dog shed tears, and tears streaked 2 lines of white on its dirty face. "I found wild eggs and stones. Brother Stone wants to grab them, but if I don't give them, he'll hit me. Upon hearing these words, Stone's face turned red, and the faces of several women around, including Aunt Lou, also changed. They originally formed a team to go up the mountain to dig wild vegetables. When they saw two little dolls arguing, they thought it was just a fight between children. Seeing the two children arguing fiercely, Aunt Lou quickly went to find Nanzhi. How did you know it would be stones and dogs grabbing things? Seeking monthly tickets for collecting comments and recommendations, babies, the communication group is here. Welcome everyone to join the group to communicate and chat together. Penguin ID 7976071126, end of this chapter. Chapter 2. Wild Eggs. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. The source has no content or has errors. Chapter 3. Compensation. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. Chapter 3 Compensation. After listening to Wu's words, Nanzhi looked around and bent down to pick up a straight wooden stick to hold in her hand. This stick is still used by dogs on weekdays, and it's quite easy to pick up now. Say it again. Be careful, I'll beat you to death. Your Shirtu has been hiring cats, teasing dogs, and bullying village children all day, and now he's beaten up my dog, you motherly and still spitting blood. Aren't you just trying to bully our orphan and widowed mother without anyone to support you? When your son bullied us today, someone saw him. What's wrong? Your son can't grab anything and you, a mother, came to our door to steal it. A whole family of bandits. Wu was stuck in her throat and couldn't get out. How could she not have thought that Lin was so powerful now? Looking at the wooden stick pointing at her, Wu immediately wanted to sit on the ground and splash. Nanzhi quickly swung his stick and slammed it fiercely onto the ground. Looking at the pits and dust on the ground, Wu's body stiffened. I don't know how painful it would have been if it had hit me just now. What's going on? Make a fuss about something. Li was watching a group of people with big heads gathered around him. It was just noon, the hottest time of the day. Why didn't everyone go home to rest and run to the Shen family to gather around? I heard the noise from a long distance. Li Zheng. The women who were watching all made way, so that they could see the scene in the courtyard clearly. What's going on? It's already noon, and one by one, they're not going home to cook for the men. What's going on here? Shen Dashan was momentarily stunned by the scene in the yard. He thought the Lin family had been bullied, but now he looks as if the Wu family has fallen behind. Although he thought to himself, he still put on a serious expression and said, Wu, what are you doing in the Shen family yard? Seeing Li Zheng coming, Wu suddenly felt a bit guilty. Her eyes rolled and she wanted to run away, but she was blocked by Nanzhi. Uncle Li Zheng, you're here at the right time. Could you please give us an evaluation? Nanzhi held a wooden stick in one hand and blocked Wu's path, looking apologetically at Shen Dashan. Li Zheng's family has helped him a lot, and now he still has to trouble others. Shen Dashan nodded and waited for them to explain the whole story. Tell me, I'm not just here for nothing, he said, our family is having a tough time, as you know, this morning I was starving and my dog was filial. He went to the mountain to find food for me and luckily found 5 wild eggs. However, he was caught by a stone from the Wu family and insisted on snatching it. My dog refused to give it and got nosebleeds from the stone. Nanzhi spoke, and several women around her began to whisper. They had just heard Wu's howl there, and they really thought it was a dog starving to grab something. You're talking nonsense, Wu retorted. I'm talking nonsense. My dog is still lying in bed now, and Aunt Lou and the others have all seen it. I didn't go to seek compensation from you, but you came to my house to slander my dog. Do you want to be shameless? Shen Dashan's face turned black after hearing this. It's okay if the two dolls accidentally injured each other during their playful activities. Now, everyone is having a hard time. Where is the Wu family so big that they have to compete with their orphan and widowed mother for food? Not to mention the fact that the villain first reported and turned the tables. Glancing at Wu Shi, Shendashan snorted coldly. Wu, what do you say? Looking at the people whispering around, Wu's words were a bit awkward. She bullied Lin's family privately on weekdays, so she said in front of Li Zheng, I'll just leave. After finishing speaking, everyone wanted to leave, but they all made way. After all, they were all in the same village, so it was not easy to tear their faces. Aunt Wu, do you want to leave now? Nanzhi stood in front of Wu with a stick. Shendashan remained silent and stood with his hands behind his back, waiting for Nanzhi to handle it himself. What else do you want? Wu was also angry. She had already lost someone, but now she's not allowed to leave. Her gaze towards Nanzhi suddenly carries a hint of malice. I hurt my dog with a stone, so I have to hire a village doctor. You have to compensate me for my medical expenses. Wu's eyes widened in disbelief and she said, What? I'll compensate you for your medical expenses. Isn't it just that you've had some nosebleeds? Whoever's child hasn't had nosebleeds, your dog Jean Gui still needs to hire a village doctor, right? If it were two children playing together, I wouldn't say anything. The children in the village are honest, but this time it was your family who robbed things with stones. Who child can let people hit them casually? The Shen family is experiencing a lot of commotion, and some of the men who have returned from the ground have also heard the commotion. Wu's husband and father-in-law also heard the letter. Looking at his wife's embarrassing appearance, Li Tian felt a swelling pain in her temples, but still didn't speak and only looked at his father. Mr. Li's face is not much better. His wife has been getting worse day by day since she gave birth to a stone, and bullying the Lin family in private is nothing more than chewing on people's tongues behind their backs. Now he has the courage to run into other people's homes and cause trouble. Unfortunately, he was still blocked and unable to speak. Miss Lin, what do you want to do? You can tell me. Li Zheng also saw the Li family father and son rushing over and coughed softly. I don't want much either, 101, Nanzhi replied. 101 is not too much, naturally not too much. If you invite the village doctor to come to your door, you will get 21, not to mention that if there is really something to do, you will have to take some herbs. You're stealing money, right? Old Li originally wanted to speak, but was suppressed by Wu's voice. He looked at his own son, who only hated iron for not turning into steel. What kind of person is this marrying? Shut up, lousy. Li Tian also blushed, as his wife could be considered to have ruined her own face. Wu saw her husband and father-in-law standing on the side and immediately fell silent. Uncle Li, you happen to be the head of the family. What do you think? Shendashan looked at old Li and asked. I have also heard the whole story. Although it was a stone that hit the dog, isn't this 101 more, said Li, rubbing the dry smoke in his hand. My family's life is not very easy these days. A hint of disdain flashed in Shendashan's eyes. If the Li family had a difficult time, who could still afford to live in this pear-blossom village? I don't know how much Uncle Li thinks it's appropriate to compensate. Li Zheng didn't express his opinion and continued to ask. This. Mr. Li looked at the people around him and said, 51. In fact, he wanted to say 31, but with so many people around, he couldn't really lose face for the whole family. After all, no matter what, it was indeed his own family who hit someone with a stone. Before the bitter master could speak up, Wu's crazy woman went to bite back at the family, but unfortunately was stopped by someone. Miss Lin, are you looking at this? Shendashan looked at Nanzhi, his eyes full of inquiries. 101, not a penny can be missing. Nanzhi waved the stick in her hand, causing Wu's body to tremble. You can't be too greedy in this way of being a person. Old Li's face had already turned black. How could he not have seen Lin's courage before? One mouth is 101. If you don't want to lose money, Uncle Li, you can bring the stone and have my dog beat him up. If he bleeds, I'll settle it. You crazy woman. If you dare to touch my rock, I won't end up with you. Wu Shi wanted to tug at Nanzhi, but was slapped by Li Tian. The one-slapped palm fan made a loud noise, causing the women who were watching the excitement to take a few steps back. Li Tian is really good at it. Wu looked at Li Tian incredulously, unable to believe that her husband could handle her. Just as he was about to start crying, he was stared back by Li Tian. In the end, old Li was still afraid that the situation would escalate and he would lose his entire family. He asked Li Tian to take Wu's family home and collect 100 yuan in front of Li Zheng before giving it to Nanzhi to count. Without the excitement, everyone returned home one after another, feeling uncomfortable under the scorching sun. Seeking monthly tickets for collecting comments and recommendations, babies, end of this chapter. Chapter 4. Entering the Mountains. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4. Entering the Mountains. Upon entering the house, Nanzhi saw the dog sleeping soundly and not being disturbed by the farce just now. She took 2 sweet potatoes and boiled them in a pot. Nanzhi then went out again to find the village doctor. Since he has some money in his hand, he must first ask the doctor to examine him, so as not to have anything to do. The village doctor is very close to the Shen family, and it takes only half an hour to get there. The old man checked the dog's pulse again to reassure Nanzhi that there was nothing serious. However, the child's health is a bit worse now. He didn't say anything more afterwards. The Shen family is now just the 2 of them, poor and penniless. There's nothing to fill the child's body with. Looking at Nanzhi's floating footsteps, I'm afraid she hasn't eaten anything for 3 days. I understand, Mr. Wang. How much does this diagnosis cost? Forget it, I didn't do anything. The old man waved his hand and was about to go home with the medicine box on his back. Mr. Wang, please wait a moment. We still need to pay for the diagnosis fee, otherwise it won't sound good when it's rumored. Nanzhi took out 21 from his pocket and was about to thrust it into Mr. Wang's hand. It's okay, I didn't do anything this time. If you really want to give it, just give me 2 yuan. The 2 of them chatted for a long time, and in the end, Mr. Wang collected 5 yuan and left. Looking at the dog sleeping soundly in bed, Nanzhi's heart suddenly became sour. Then I went to the kitchen again. Sweet potatoes were boiling in the pot, emitting a sweet aroma that caused her stomach to wriggle. The empty space in her stomach made her feel as if she was starving and gnawing on each other. I scooped up half a bowl of water from the pot to cook sweet potatoes and slowly drank it. With a hint of sweet hot soup in my stomach, Nanzhi felt better. Waiting for the sweet potatoes to be cooked, Nanzhi even scooped the sweet water from the pot into a bowl, not daring to waste it at all. Although it looks a bit yellowish-green, drinking it is sweet. He took the 2 wild eggs that were half missing, added some salt and oil to a bowl, mixed with some warm water, and steamed them in a pot. Only then did Nanzhi go and call the dog. After waking up, the little one was still a bit confused, humming and dreaming of wild egg and stone brother. Dog, wash your hands quickly, it's time for lunch. Nanzhi touched the dog's head and silently put it down. My hands are also very dirty. The 2 women washed their faces and hands before going to pick up lunch. It's just 2 sweet potatoes, a small bowl of egg custard, and a large bowl of sweet potato sweet water. What Nanzhi used to frown on before, the dog's eyes lit up, as if he had seen some delicacies. Mother, there are sweet potatoes and egg custard. The dog's eyes were full of admiration, and Nanzhi's eyes looked sour. The egg was picked up by the dog, and the sweet potato was also exchanged with the egg. This meal was thanks to the dog. The dog was satisfied with a meal and not only had enough to eat today, but also had egg custard. Even Nanzhi was stuffed by the little one and ate 2 bites of egg custard. Looking at the dog groping its stomach foolishly, Nanzhi sighed in her heart. This child is really sensible, even if the original owner has a weak personality, but the child has been taught very well by her. The sun outside is scorching. Nanzhi originally wanted to go up the mountain to find some food, but after looking at the sunlight outside, she still thought of waiting until later to go up the mountain. He coaxed the dog to the house to rest. She sat alone in the hall, staring blankly at the white ground that had been photographed. Why did she travel here? Since she has arrived, does it mean that the dog's mother has already starved to death? It is now the end of June in the lunar calendar, and there is still more than a month before the autumn harvest. Unfortunately, this year's severe drought has resulted in the sparse grain in the fields being sun-dried to death. In Nanzhi's memory, sweet potatoes and potatoes were distributed by the government last year. Each village had 2,000 kilograms of each type, and Li Zheng distributed them to the villagers for planting. The villagers are not very confident in the high yield of this new grain. Each household only needs some, but not much. If it weren't for the strict requirements of the village to plant more or less sweet potatoes, everyone's financial situation would have been drained this year. Who would have thought that the least favored sweet potato could save lives in this year? Thinking about the land she had sold at home, Nanzhi sighed. Although the other family has had a tough year, they can at least fill their stomachs. At least they can survive until the autumn harvest and get some new food. It's not like her own family doesn't even have many sweet potatoes. It seems like she has to buy land to grow food besides raising children. It was probably around 2 p.m. when Nanzhi went to wake up the dog. Although the dog is young, it is very obedient and doesn't ask Nanzhi why she went up the mountain. It obediently carried a small bamboo basket and followed behind her. There is a large mountain behind Lihua village, and the villagers usually walk towards the west. It is said that there were wild wolves in the east before, which killed 2 hunters from outside. After that, no one dared to climb the east mountain again. When she arrived at the front of the mountain, Nanzhi had a difficult time. Nowadays, many people in the village have gone to the mountain to dig wild vegetables. It's not certain that she will find anything to eat when she goes to the west mountain. Although she still has 95 yuan to spend now, she doesn't want to buy food in the village. Firstly, the villagers don't have much food, let alone the current drought. Who knows if there will be a harvest this year? Secondly, most of the villagers rely on the sweet potatoes saved last year to make a living. She wants to earn money to buy some fine grains and mix them with coarse grains for her dog to eat. After looking at 2 completely different roads, Nanzhi ruthlessly grabbed the firewood knife with one hand and led the dog up the mountain to the east. Compared to starving to death at home with her dog, she is willing to take a gamble. She doesn't believe her luck can be so bad that she meets a wolf that hasn't been seen in more than 10 years. Due to the prolonged wilderness, the road up the mountain had already been covered by weeds, and the 2 of them could only slowly move towards the mountains. After walking for half an hour, I arrived at a slightly open territory. Looking at the trees around, Nanzhi felt a bit strange, but couldn't even tell where the strange was for a while. He only instructed the dog to look around and see if there were any wild vegetables, and not to run away. With the assurance of the dog, Nanzhi crouched around to explore. She actually knew very few wild vegetables, and with the current situation, most of the plants that could grow were inedible. The 2 of them groped for half a day and only found 2 or 3 pounds of mother.in.law ding. Looking at the grass in the dog's small basket, Nanzhi's heart burst into tears. I used to find it fun to watch the protagonist eating grass in the wilderness survival game, but now it's my turn. It's really a good cycle of the heavenly way, and the heavens have spared no one. After seeing that the sun was not yet setting, Nanzhi felt a bit unwilling. Now she can only be considered as groping in a small area on the periphery. Will she walk inside and have a bigger harvest? Looking at those mother.in.law ding happily like a dog picking up money, Nanzhi's heart was still prepared to walk further inside. Although entering the mountain may be dangerous, leaving the little dog here may make her even more restless. It's better to bring it with you. The 2 of them walked in front of each other, with Nanzhi waving a firewood knife to clear the way, and the dog obediently following behind. After walking for over a quarter of an hour, Nanzhi was really weak, and the little food she had eaten at noon was probably already digested. Looking at the fallen leaves around Nanzhi, she threw her basket onto the ground. Sure enough, as a non-chieftain, how could she have any good luck? I'm afraid this old man wants to throw her into this world and starve her to death. Who knew that as soon as she sat on the ground, she felt a pain in her buttocks and almost jumped up. Picking up the culprit, Nanzhi widened her eyes in disbelief, rubbed and kneaded repeatedly to make sure she wasn't mistaken, and then burst into tears. Seeking monthly tickets for collecting comments and recommendations, babies, end of this chapter. Chapter 5. Non-Emirate Transit. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. Non-Emirate Transit. Nanzhi didn't mind the mud on the dog's clothes and excitedly hugged him into her arms. Dog, there's something to eat now. The dog looked at the prickly thing in his mother's hand with a bewildered expression. Is Auntie hungry and foolish? How do you eat this thing? He looked at the strange things lying everywhere on the ground and picked up one. Holding it in his hand, he felt a piercing pain in his palm. Dog, this is called a chestnut, Nanzhi said, placing a prickly ball on the ground. With a tap from the back of his knife, several smooth chestnuts rolled out of it. It tastes sweet, crispy when eaten raw, and glutinous when cooked. It can be used as food. The dog blinked its eyes. He had eaten this shiny little fruit before. Last year, Grandpa gave him a few, which were even better than sweet potatoes. Knowing that this thing could be eaten, the dog quickly started picking up prickly balls on the ground, and Nanzhi felt a little heartbroken. Dog, be good. Auntie, come and smash the prickly ball. How about the dog picking up chestnuts? The dog paused as if pondering whether it could be done faster. After a few seconds, it nodded and said, okay. This area is all wild chestnut trees, with a large scale. Nanzhi smiled at them. Although wild chestnuts are smaller, they are still more suitable for their current situation than mother.in.law ding. Chestnuts can be used as staple food and can also be stored for a long time. One big and one small silently picked up chestnuts, and only when the sun was about to set did Nanzhi stop his movements. I smashed a few prickly balls and then used a wooden knife to break open the chestnut shell. I followed the dog and ate some stomach padding before sitting down to rest. After looking at the more than 30 pounds of chestnut branches in the basket, I dug up some mother.in.law's branches and covered them on top. After thinking about it, I pulled some dead tree branches and spread them on top. After confirming that the chestnuts were properly hidden, he led the dog down the mountain again. The two of them walked slowly on their way home after a busy afternoon, especially Nanzhi, who was carrying a basket weighing over 40 pounds, felt a burning pain on her shoulders. The original body is too thin, and the rope may have worn through the skin when pressed against the bone. When the two of them returned to the village, it was already dark and they didn't meet many people along the way. I only met the Wu family when I arrived home. Watching the two women carrying a basket, Wu felt a little suspicious. The basket still looked a bit heavy, and she didn't know what was inside. When passing by her, Nanzhi didn't pay any attention and just led the dog home, as if she hadn't seen it. Pooh, what do I think? Who cares if even a little bit of my mother.in.law ding hides like that? Wu spat softly as she looked at Nanzhi and the dog walking away. She thought she was looking for something good, but the result was some quiet mother.in.law who hid it so tightly with branches. With a cold snort, he turned around and returned to the yard. Upon entering the courtyard, Nanzhi quickly locked the door and cautiously followed the dog into the room. She doesn't plan to put these chestnuts in the kitchen, she has to hide them inside to rest assured. 30 pounds of chestnuts were spread on the ground, and the dog's mouth was almost at the root of its ear. With so many chestnuts, Auntie wouldn't faint anymore. Finally, I heard the dog's stomach growl a few times, and it was only then that Nanzhi regained consciousness and went to cook. It's just cooking, which means boiling 2 sweet potatoes and then cold mixing a bowl of Granny's dice. After instructing the dog to stay inside, Nanzhi grabbed another handful of chestnuts before going to the kitchen. There are still 2 smaller sweet potatoes left, and she is afraid that the dog won't have enough to eat. After cooking both sweet potatoes and chestnuts, Nanzhi cooked a bowl of washed mother.in-law dice, drained the water, sprinkled a little salt, and mixed with soy oil to make it a dish. She also wanted to have a hot stir-fry, but now there's only a bowl of oil left at home. With chestnuts and cold mixed mother.in-law dice, the dog ate even more happily than at noon. Perhaps because this body had not eaten anything else for too long, the slightly salty mother.in-law dice made Nanzhi very satisfied. After dinner, the 2 of them drank a bowl of sweet water boiled with sweet potatoes before washing up and going to bed. The next morning, Nanzhi walked out with her dog. She had to pick up more chestnuts and put them back now. There are many wild chestnut trees on the mountain, and she and the dog must not be able to swallow so much. Why not tell Li Zheng to let the other people in the village also have some food to store? But she needs to save up enough for her and the dog first. Because he was going into the mountain, Nanzhi let the dog wear yesterday's dirty clothes. It was still early, and the 2 of them didn't feel too hot walking. Finally, they arrived at the chestnut tree and sweated profusely. Nanzhi wiped the sweat off the dog's face and sighed. The weather is really hot now, and the mountains are still better with tree shade blocking it. I'm afraid if I don't wipe my body when I go back, I'll be able to rub out mud balls. She also wanted to take a shower, but the water output from her well at home couldn't compare to before, and even the small river outside the village had dropped by more than half due to diverting water to the fields. She resisted the urge to take a shower last night. Now she feels the stickiness around her neck and feels a bit overwhelmed. However, compared to cleanliness, life is more important, and after a while, she started the mechanical action of smashing and stabbing the ball again. The dog still obediently picked up chestnuts and occasionally chatted with Nanzhi, saying what he had dreamed of last night and what he had just seen. Looking at the dog talking incessantly, Nanzhi suddenly had a flash of inspiration. She seems to know why she felt something was wrong yesterday. Thinking about it, she tentatively touched the mud on the ground, which was not as dry as the western mountains behind the village, but rather slightly damp. Compared to the area around Dongshan, the soil here is noticeably wetter. Many of the trees on the west side of the mountain have already been sun-dried to a lifeless appearance. Yesterday when she entered the mountain, she felt that the trees on the east side were growing more vigorously. Although the difference on the outside was not too big, it was obvious that a section of plants were growing more inside. Is it possible that there is a water source here? With this conjecture, Nanzhi felt his heart pounding incessantly, as if about to pop out. However, she remained silent and continued to thrust the ball. The weather had not yet heated up, so when chestnuts were loaded first, she took her dog to look for water. Thinking about something in her heart, Nanzhi's movements noticeably accelerated. In less than 2 hours, she packed her backpack full, leaving only some space for her mother.in-law. Put the backpack under the tree and Nanzhi is ready to take the dog around. Maybe she can find water if she's not a chieftain. After wandering around for a while, Nanzhi still found nothing, only some purslane. Looking at the wild vegetable in his hand, Nanzhi sighed in his heart. Purslane has a cold nature, and the dog must not be able to eat it now. His own body is afraid that he cannot eat more, and purslane cold salad requires a lot of garlic paste. Thinking that the small vegetable at home has not grown a single blade of grass in the wilderness, Nanzhi's stomach is filled with sour water. Patting the dust off his body, he was ready to signal the dog to leave, only to see him pouting his little butt and burying his head in the dirt. "Dog, what are you digging for?" Nanzhi asked. The dog, with a pair of small hands covered in black soil, grabbed a mushroom and shouted, "Auntie, there are mushrooms here." Mushrooms. Nanzhi's head is full of question marks. Can mushrooms still grow here after being dry for half a year? When she stepped forward and took the mushroom from the dog's hand, Nanzhi blinked and said, "Is this a straw mushroom?" Seeking monthly tickets for collecting comments and recommendations, babies, end of this chapter. Chapter 6. Dafengshou, salad of assorted fresh vegetables. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. Chapter 6. Dafengshou, salad of assorted fresh vegetables. Perhaps because there was no rain, these grass mushrooms were a circle smaller than what she had seen in her previous life. Mushrooms have a high requirement for humidity. Since there are mushrooms on the eastern mountain, it proves that there will definitely be a water source here. At first, she thought she had thought too much about it, but these few grass mushrooms made her certain that there must be water deep in the East Mountain. The sun was already hanging in the sky, and Nanzhi wiped the sweat off her forehead and beckoned the dog to sit down and rest for a while. The sweet potatoes at home are gone, and this morning she cooked a bowl of chestnuts, which can be considered their lunch. Unfortunately, there are too many fallen leaves on this mountain, so I dare not make a fire, otherwise I can still roast mushrooms to eat. Thinking of the white roasted mushrooms without chili noodles, Nanzhi shook her head. Let's forget about it. Even if roasted, she may not be able to eat it. If roasted half-cooked, they may not starve to death, but they may die from food poisoning, vomiting, diarrhea, and collapse. After resting for a while, the two of them started digging through the roots of trees again. One by one, they really picked up a lot of grass mushrooms. The dog was lucky, and often several could be dug up under a tree. After rummaging and searching all the way to the deep mountains, Nanzhi suddenly regained his senses as he looked at the tree trunk that was noticeably thicker than outside. This is already the deep entrance of Dongshan. Hurriedly leading the excited dog back. Auntie, why don't we go in? The dog was happily picking up a lot of mushrooms, and he and Auntie couldn't go hungry for a long time. Dog, remember, no one can take you up the mountain except for Auntie. Nanzhi stopped and looked at the dog seriously. Okay, the dog nodded as he looked at his mother seriously. On the way back to the chestnut tree, Nanzhi also found a clump of wild garlic, which almost made her jump up with joy. This can be considered the third seasoning at home. Although no water source was found, Nanzhi's heart was about to bloom with joy as she watched as even the dog's small basket was filled with purslane. She said she couldn't be a chieftain forever, even if feng shui took turns, it should have been transferred to her long ago. When the two of them went down the mountain, Nanzhi deliberately walked around with his dog, and the journey was smooth without encountering anyone else. The first thing Nanzhi did when he returned home was to lock the courtyard door. Today they have a Dafengshou, salad of assorted fresh vegetables. I brought back a total of over 40 pounds of chestnuts, more than 2 pounds of purslane, and hundreds of mushrooms of all sizes, definitely not less than 5 pounds. There will be 2 more days for the market in the town. If she sells some chestnuts and mushrooms, she should be able to buy some fine grain for the dog to eat. Thinking of receiving a considerable amount of silver, Nanzhi happily hugged the dog and gave it a smack kiss, causing the dog's little face to blush. I have organized my family's grain reserves. There are over 80 kilograms of chestnuts, 5 kilograms of grass mushrooms, over 2 kilograms of purslane, and 1 pound of wild garlic left in my mother.in.law. Looking at those grains, Nanzhi felt a bit lost in his heart. Yesterday, he and his dog almost starved to death, and today his family has stored grain. Unfortunately, although chestnuts are full, they cannot be eaten as staple food all the time. Coupled with the hot and dry weather, there is no refrigerator or fresh-keeping cabinet here, and grass mushrooms cannot be stored at all. Either sell it in the town now, or sell it to the wealthy families in the village, or dry it and store it as food at home. Looking at the small basket of straw mushrooms, Nanzhi sighed. It's around 4 p.m. now, and if you walk to the town, you won't be able to arrive until 6 p.m. By then, it's already past dinner and I'm afraid it won't sell for a good price. Selling mushrooms to villagers naturally leads people to ask about their sources, and at this time, fresh mushrooms are definitely not cheap in price. There are naturally no too affordable options for villagers to buy. If you eat it at home, Nanzhi is a bit reluctant. After all, although there are some chestnuts at home that can support it now, if you can sell the grass mushrooms for money to buy fine grains for the dog to eat, it will definitely be more manageable than a few grass mushrooms. After a while of ideological struggle, Nanzhi still carried the remaining 95 yuan in her arms and half of the chestnuts in her backpack. She asked the dog to carry a small basket containing 4 pounds of mushrooms, and finally grabbed a withered mother. In Ding to cover it before pulling him out of the door. She remembered that Aunt Lu had a donkey cart at home, and it wouldn't take her less than half an hour to drive it to the town, so she could still make it to dinner. The dog obediently led Nanzhi all the way, without asking them what they were going to do, only tightly holding onto the basket. When she arrived at Aunt Lu's house, Nanzhi happened to hear someone talking in the yard. After hesitating for a moment, he reached out and knocked on the door. "Aunt Lu, are you at home?" The sound in the yard paused, and then came the footsteps of Aunt Lu. "Who is it?" "It's here." After opening the door, Nanzhi saw that Aunt Lu's eyes were slightly red and her face looked a bit haggard. "Miss Lin, what are you doing?" Aunt Lu looked at Nanzhi and Goer's back lifting, and was also somewhat surprised. Nanzhi also pretended not to notice Aunt Lu's abnormality and said, "Aunt Lu, I would like to ask if you can borrow our donkey cart. I want to take my dog to town for a trip." Upon hearing these words, Aunt Lu's face turned pale and she hesitated. Nowadays, due to the drought, there is not much grass to feed donkeys at home. "Aunt Lu, I'm not borrowing for free," Nanzhi said as she looked around again. Seeing Nanzhi's movements, Aunt Lu naturally understood and let the two of them into the yard. "Auntie, I can't come up with anything good right now," Nanzhi looked at Aunt Lu and continued, "I know that life at home is not easy now. Today, I took my dog to Dongshan and picked up some chestnuts." After listening to Nanzhi's words, Aunt Lu's eyelids twitched. Chestnuts are considered a good thing now. It hasn't been autumn harvest yet, and it hasn't rained for 6 months. Now, our family also relies on some sweet potatoes to fill our stomachs, but sweet potatoes are almost bottoming out. So yesterday she followed her to Shishan to dig some wild vegetables, but apart from those inedible weeds, there was nothing to fill her stomach with. Just now she had a fight with her old man over food. The 2 little grandsons at home are now as thin as matchsticks. She wants to go to the town to buy some rice and noodles, even if it's mixed with coarse grains, for the children to eat. But the old man refused, unwilling to touch the family's money, saying that he would hold on until the autumn harvest. "If I can pick up chestnuts myself, I can not only eat them at home, but also take them to the town to sell for food." This. Looking at Aunt Lu's appearance, Nanzhi knew that there was a reason for this and said, "Aunt, if it's okay, I'll take you up the mountain tomorrow to pick up chestnuts. But I want to borrow your donkey cart and go to town to buy some food for the dog to mix with." Looking at Nanzhi's serious expression, Aunt Lu gritted her teeth and nodded, "Okay." Anyway, the old man at home couldn't bear to part with that little silver money, so he had to find a way to raise his own grandson. Isn't it just for keeping donkeys? If not, she will go to the mountains tomorrow to cut more grass and come back to feed. Helping Nanzhi put things on the donkey cart, Aunt Lu originally wanted her own son to help drive, but considering Nanzhi's current situation, she could only advise her to come back earlier and not delay her time. Fortunately, the donkey in Aunt Lu's family has a gentle personality. Even Nanzhi, a newcomer, can drive smoothly and steadily. "Auntie, why did you tell Grandma Lu about chestnuts?" the village dog asked softly after leaving. He didn't want his mother to faint again like yesterday. There was no food at home, and he didn't understand why she had to tell others about chestnuts. After touching the dog's head, Nanzhi spoke up and said, "Firstly, we borrowed the donkey cart from Grandma Lu's house. We can't borrow it for nothing. Although we have a few tens of one at home, we have to use it to buy food. Secondly, it's because." Nanzhi paused for a moment, then glanced at the curious dog and said, "Secondly, there are still many chestnuts on Dongshan, and the 2 of us cannot finish them. Our family used to have no food, and the aunts and mother-in-law in the village have helped us to some extent. Their lives are also difficult now. It's better to tell them than let those chestnuts rot in the mountains. Seeking monthly tickets for collecting comments and recommendations, babies, end of this chapter. Chapter 7. Buying Grain. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. Buying Grain. After hesitating for a moment, the dog still raised its own question. Then why didn't Auntie directly tell Grandpa Lijiang that Grandpa Lijiang treats the dog the best? Of course I can say it, but not now. Nanzhi didn't say much as he looked at the dog with a bewildered expression, only focused on driving the donkey cart, thinking of getting to town earlier. The journey went smoothly and it took less than half an hour to reach the town. Nanzhi asked an old lady about the location of a slightly larger restaurant in the town, thanked her, and then left with her dog. The situation in the town is much better than in the village, and most families only have a slightly lower standard of living, so they are not as hungry as they are. Seeing some vendors setting up stalls on the street, Nanzhi felt relieved. There were still people doing business on the street, so that selling something on her own would not attract attention. It seems that she thought too much. She tightened the rope of her backpack and took her dog to a larger restaurant. The shop assistant looks like a round-faced teenager, only 16 or 17 years old. Seeing Nanzhi and Goer enter the door, they didn't care about their clothes and greeted them with a smile. Please come inside. Watching the waiter come over, the dog felt a bit nervous. He held Nanzhi's little hand tightly, knowing that there wasn't much money at home. Nanzhi felt the dog's nervousness and sighed before speaking up. Waiter, I want to find the manager in your store. After listening to Nanzhi's words, the shop assistant hesitated a bit, but still signaled to them that they could sit down first. He went to ask the steward for help. Watching the young man's hurried figure, Nanzhi touched the dog's little hand and silently calmed his emotions. The steward arrived quickly and was only slightly stunned by the attire of Nanzhi and her wife. After bowing, she invited them to the backyard to speak. Please take a seat, my surname is Wang. Just call me Steward Wang. Steward Wang spoke up after announcing his home. I don't know what you want to sell at our restaurant. During this period, people came to the restaurant one after another to sell their own vegetables and fruits, and he naturally guessed the intentions of the mother and son in front of him. Coincidentally, due to the current drought, some farmers are willing to sell some vegetables and fruits, and they are also happy to harvest them. Steward Wang, you're welcome. My husband's surname is Shen, and today he wants to sell some chestnuts. He picked some on the mountain a few days ago and wanted to sell them in exchange for some grain. After Nanzhi finished speaking, she lifted the wild vegetables from the basket and revealed the bare chestnuts. I asked the waiter to go and ask the chef to come out and inspect the goods. Manager Wang poured 2 cups of tea for Nanzhi and Goer. The 2 big and 1 small were drinking tea quietly, waiting for the chef to reply. Steward Wang, these chestnuts can be collected. The master chef's surname is Zhang, and everyone usually calls him Master Zhang. He nodded in satisfaction after looking at the chestnuts in the basket. The current year is not good, and there are not many vegetables to sell in the restaurant. Although these chestnuts are smaller, they are better than fresh ones. I don't know how much Mrs. Shen wants to sell. Manager Wang asked. 5 yuan per kilogram. Nanzhi didn't say much, but during good times, wild chestnuts were sold for 3 yuan per kilogram. Steward Wang didn't bargain, so he nodded and let the round-faced waiter help weigh the chestnuts. Since Steward Wang is so straightforward, I still have something to sell here. After Nanzhi finished speaking, he took the small bamboo basket from the dog's pocket. Watching the little bamboo basket king being covered by his mother-in-law Ding, the abbot felt a bit confused. Although some people have come to their own restaurant to sell some wild vegetables, these mother-in-law Ding are already wilting and looking helpless. How can they still cook? It wasn't until Nanzhi lifted the layer of wild vegetables above that his eyes lit up. The basket is filled with fresh grass mushrooms, which look like they have just been picked. Are these straw mushrooms? Manager Wang's voice was not low, which attracted the shopkeeper and Master Zhang who were weighing beside him to look over. I don't know how many more. We'll take all of them. Seeing Steward Wang staring at him with glowing eyes, Nanzhi could only say, Steward Wang, don't misunderstand. I was just lucky enough to pick this, and that's all for the whole family. Upon hearing these words, Manager Wang's heart felt as if he had been splashed with cold water. He calmed down and realized that it had not rained for 6 months now. It was only luck that Lady Shen was able to pick these mushrooms. He had thought more about it. Mrs. Shen, we'll take these straw mushrooms. Do you think I'll charge you 61 per kilogram? Nanzhi didn't immediately agree, thinking for a while before nodding. Watching Wang Guancher Nanzhi, who had a slightly cheerful expression on his face after nodding, he moved his gaze away. She never thought these straw mushrooms could be sold for 61 per kilogram. Her expected price was only 31, and now it has completely doubled. Steward Wang, there are a total of 43 kilograms of chestnuts and 4.22 kilograms of straw mushrooms, totaling 467 won, said the shopkeeper. Manager Wang waved his hand and asked the waiter to go to the front hall, go and get some money. He also invited Nanzhi and Goer to sit and drink tea, and followed Master Zhang to the kitchen. Auntie, have all our things been sold yet? The dog tugged at Nanzhi's sleeve, his little face showing some curiosity. Well, they've all been sold out. Later, Auntie will take her dog to buy food. After sitting for a while, the shop assistant returned to the backyard and handed the skewered copper plate to Nanzhi, saying, Madam Shen, the total is 467 won. Nanzhi nodded. Just as she was about to carry her backpack and leave with her dog, she heard the voice of Manager Wang coming from behind. Shen Nyangzi, wait a moment. Steward Wang handed over an oiled paper packet as he spoke. If there are any wild goods in the future, I hope Madam can sell them to our restaurant. Without hesitation, Nanzhi picked it up and nodded, saying, naturally. After leaving the restaurant, Nanzhi drove her donkey cart to the grain and oil shop. Now she has a total of 562 won in her hand. In my memory, aged rice costs 3 won per kilogram, new rice costs 5 won per kilogram, white flour costs 6 won per kilogram, black flour costs 2 won per kilogram, salt costs 20 won per kilogram, and soybean oil costs 10 won per kilogram. I just don't know how much grain prices will rise in this current year. Auntie, are we going to buy sweet potatoes and potatoes? The dog looked at the sparse street where some people were setting up stalls, and looked up at Nanzhi with his head raised. Nanzhi also looked at the sparse small stalls on both sides of the street, most of which were sold by people from the village. They looked like old rice from last year, probably because there was not enough food at home. She wanted to sell fine grains to exchange for sweet potatoes and other things to make ends meet. Even though it hasn't rained for 6 months now, most people still want to hold on and don't want to waste their money at home. Isn't she also thinking the same way? In fact, if she were willing to lose some face and go back to her mother's house, she wouldn't starve to death at home and leave her dog with a 3.5-year-old doll. Unfortunately, it was a glimmer of luck in my heart that caused so many people to starve to death in this not-so-bad year. People are starving to death, what's the use of leaving that silver behind? At the grain shop, Nanzhi stopped the donkey cart and just as he picked up the dog, he saw several women entering the shop. Nanzhi didn't rush in either. She just stood outside and looked at the grain prices. Even though she knew in her heart that the grain prices would definitely rise, she was still startled by the current prices. Originally, Chen rice cost 3 won per kilogram, but now it has risen to 8 won. New rice has even risen to 16 won per kilogram, with 15 won for white noodles and 5 won for black noodles. Salt costs 50 won per kilogram, and oil costs 40 won per kilogram. Seeking monthly tickets for collecting comments and recommendations, babies, End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Grain Prices. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. Chapter 8 Grain Prices. Shopkeeper, is the current grain price already so high? A woman asked. The shopkeeper looked at the sky outside and said somewhat helplessly, "Who said it's not? It hasn't rained for more than half a year now, and there hasn't been any new grain output. Naturally, grain prices are rising. Don't be fooled by the fact that the Zhou family's grain shop on the other side of the street is cheaper than their own, but they add mud and stones to the grain." A few women looked embarrassed. They originally wanted to buy more grain, but now the price of grain is too high. Maybe if we wait a little longer, the grain prices will come down. After hesitating for a while, the group of them still left. The shopkeeper sighed. "I'm afraid that grain prices will continue to soar in these years. Where will they go down?" Just as I was about to turn around and enter the store, I saw the mother and son in the corner. The shopkeeper asked, "Does this lady want to buy grain?" Nanzhi nodded. She asked Steward Wang and found out that only this grain shop in the town was the most cost-effective. After looking at Nanzhi for a while, I finally bought 40 pounds of black noodles, half a pound of salt, 1 pound of oil, 10 pounds of aged rice, and 4 pounds of white noodles. In the end, the sum of their possessions left only 157 won. The shopkeeper looked at the attire of Nanzhi Nyang and knew that their family background must not be good. He quietly looked around before whispering, "Madam, I'll say a little more. If you can farm more grain, you can farm more. The price of grain still needs to rise, but it's just the beginning." Upon hearing the shopkeeper's words, Nanzhi was stunned. "Is it just beginning now? I bought 10 kilograms of sweet potatoes and 10 kilograms of potatoes each before saying thank you and driving the donkey cart away." Before leaving, she didn't forget to hide the fine grains she had bought in her backpack, and covered the top layer with mother-in-law's dice and sweet potatoes. Finally, she took a piece of rag to cover it. No matter who looks at it, they can only consider Nanzhi and Goenyang as buying baskets of sweet potatoes. Before leaving town, Nanzhi also went to a meat shop. Now the sky has started to turn slightly blue, and the meat shop has sold everything clean, leaving only a few shaved clean bones on the side. After seeing that stick of bone, Nanzhi's eyes lit up and he finally bought those few bones for 5 won. After buying something, Nanzhi hurriedly drove the donkey cart out of town. She needs to return to Lihua village before it gets dark. The shopkeeper of the grain shop told her that there have been several incidents of grabbing food and injuring people in the past few days, so she should be careful with her dog. Causing Nanzhi to feel uneasy all the way, afraid of being robbed. After finally returning to the village, the sky had already darkened and there were not many people I met along the way. After putting things away at home, Nanzhi returned the donkey cart to Mrs. Lu's house. The two of them agreed to meet early the next morning, and it was only then that Nanzhi and her dog left Aunt Lu's yard. "Auntie, have we gone home yet?" The dog rubbed its eyes and asked drowsily. "Let's go to Grandpa Li's house," Nanzhi said softly, rubbing the dog's little head. This afternoon, the dog followed her around and hadn't eaten anything yet. She felt heartbroken and wanted to hold him, but now when she was walking, the fabric on her shoulder was rubbing against the wound and it still hurts a lot. "Dog, why don't you wait for Auntie at home? Auntie will be back soon." The dog shook its head and said, "No, I want to be with Auntie." The big and small ones walked faster, and Li Zheng's home was not far away because they walked slower in the dark than in the daytime. There was still a faint light in the courtyard of Li Zheng's house, and Nanzhi knocked on the door and stood by with his dog. "Who is it?" The person who opened the door was Zhou, the eldest daughter-in-law of Li Zheng. Seeing the person standing outside the door, I was a bit surprised and didn't understand why Nanzhi and the dog came from home. Zhou is several years older than Nanzhi. Nanzhi smiled and said, "Sister Zhou, I have something to do with Aunt Qin." Zhou was stunned for a moment, but still leaned over and let them enter the courtyard door. She doesn't really like Nanzhi much. Nanzhi's temperament is too soft, just like how dough is squeezed. Zhou also has a child of her own, so she cannot see the child suffer. Unfortunately, Nanzhi is always unwilling to accept the help of the villagers and has raised the dog and child so skinny for the sake of face. Miss Lin, why did you come so late? Qin Auntie asked as she looked at the two people entering the room. Auntie, I have something to talk to you about. Nanzhi smiled a bit shy, making people feel afraid that she was just here to borrow something. Zhou didn't say anything and went back to the kitchen to continue washing dishes. Qin Auntie saw Nanzhi like this and pulled her into the main room, even inviting her eldest grandson to play with the dog on the side. Miss Lin, if there's anything you want, just tell me. Uncle Yoli has gone out for a walk in the field. Qin Auntie gently patted Nanzhi's hand, thinking that she was the one who couldn't open the pot and came to pick up the food at home. Auntie, I went to the town today and the grain prices have already doubled. The grain shop owner said that if possible, they should try to stock up on more grain now, fearing that grain prices will continue to rise in the future. Upon hearing these words, Aunt Qin's face immediately changed. My family doesn't have much grain reserves now. Originally, my old man said we could hold on until the autumn harvest, so the whole family hasn't made much use of our silver reserves yet. They just hope that the price of grain will come down after the autumn harvest and we can buy it later. But isn't it already almost autumn harvest? Qin Auntie said. Nanzhi shook her head slightly when she saw Qin Auntie hesitating, and then continued, Auntie, you and my uncle Zhang must have planted more crops than me. It has not rained for more than half a year now. How much food can we really receive in another month's autumn harvest? Qin Auntie had no idea for a moment. Although she was in charge of the family's savings, if she wanted to raise grain, her whole family would definitely have to spend a lot of money. Nanzhi continued speaking, Auntie, I'm not saying that grain prices will increase after I've made a firm decision, but I'm just coming over to talk about what I heard today. Just in case, you can discuss with my Uncle Li Zhang and buy some and keep them at home. Okay, I'll discuss with Uncle Li when he comes back. Auntie, there's one more thing I want to tell you. Aunt Qin nodded and said, what else do you have to say? I found a large area of chestnut trees on Dongshan today. Nanzhi paused before continuing to speak, and the soil over there is much wetter, so there may be groundwater. After all, that's just speculation. She can't guarantee that Dongshan really has water, and what Nanzhi said is also somewhat uncertain. Upon hearing these words, Aunt Qin couldn't sit still anymore. The water used by the villagers to eat was all dug from the two wells at the entrance and end of the village. Today, her old man was still worried that the water from those two wells was getting less and less. Will there really be water? It should be there, but I can't find it, Nanzhi scratched her head. Good child, you can save the lives of the whole village. Speaking of Qin Auntie, she was about to burst into tears, which frightened Nanzhi at a loss. Isn't this really her bullying of the elderly? Auntie, but I still want to tell the villagers about this matter in a few days. My family's current situation. Watching Nanzhi's face turn pale, Aunt Qin patted her chest and promised not to reveal any information in advance, only waiting for her to store food for herself. After finishing his work, Nanzhi returned home with his dog in a good mood, leaving Aunt Qin alone to digest these three major matters. Waiting for Shandashan to return home, he was dragged into the house by his own old lady. You old lady, it's not good for the children to see you. Looking at Shandashan with a blush on his face, Aunt Qin rolled her eyes. How old is this old man? He is so shameless and unabashed. Miss Lin came home today. Shandashan knew he might have misunderstood and coughed awkwardly. Miss Lin came to borrow some food. It's not easy for them to be orphans and widows. Let's borrow some. What? Miss Lin went to the town today and said that the grain shop owner said that the grain prices may continue to rise in the future. Do you think our family should also stock up on some grain? Seeking monthly tickets for collecting comments and recommendations, babies, end of this chapter. Chapter 9. Picking Chestnuts. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9. Picking Chestnuts. Isn't the autumn harvest coming? Shen didn't have much confidence in saying this. After all, who knows if it will rain in the past month or so. If it really doesn't rain, I'm afraid all the crops in the field will die from drought. So, if it really doesn't rain, the fields won't be able to recover grain, and grain prices will rise again. What will our whole family eat? Shen was blocked and speechless. How did he know if it would rain or not? But if it really doesn't rain, the price of grain after the autumn harvest may not be affordable for people like them who dig in the fields. Let me tell you, let's listen to Miss Lin and buy some grain to put away first. Even if it rains later, we will only lose some silver money. If it doesn't rain, our whole family won't starve to death. After thinking for a moment, Shen nodded and said, "Tomorrow, I'll go talk to some village elders about it." "Alright, let's go wash up and sleep early." After finishing speaking, she was about to lie down and was pulled up by Aunt Qin. Miss Lin said two more things. She said, watching his wife's mysterious appearance, Shen felt a moment of confusion in his heart. Lin Yadu found a chestnut forest on Dongshan. Upon hearing these words, Shen sat up and spoke in an incredulous tone. Did Miss Lin find a chestnut forest in Dongshan? Yes, and it's possible that there might be some underground water on Dongshan. Qin Auntie doesn't understand what underground water is, but if it's water, that's a good thing. No, I have to go talk to the clan elders now. After finishing speaking, Shen was about to get out of bed, put on his shoes, and run outside, only to be grabbed by Aunt Qin's sleeve. "Why are you panicking? I haven't finished speaking yet." Qin Auntie gave Shen a resentful glance and waited for him to calm down before continuing. "Miss Lin said she wants us not to tell the villagers for now, and we'll talk about it in a few days." That's right. Her family is just the mother and son. Since it was discovered by Miss Lin, she definitely needs to stay at home first. Shen completely calmed down and the two began to discuss buying food. "I'll have Qingchuan go to the town tomorrow to inquire and discuss with the clan elders." Shen has two sons in total, the eldest named Shen Qingchuan and the youngest named Shen Qinghe. What is the situation with Li Zheng's family? Nanzhi naturally doesn't know. She is busy stewing soup in the kitchen. She also left some straw mushrooms at home, which happened to be stewed with stick bones. She also looked at the oil paper package that Steward Wang gave her. There were 2 xiaobing, baked cake and griddle, in it. Although it was completely cold, it made their wives drool. If she had known that there was xiaobing, baked cake and griddle, in it, she and the dog would have starved all the way. I don't know how long it will take to stew the soup. After eating the xiaobing, baked cake and griddle, with the dog, they coaxed him to squint for a while and wake him up after the soup is cooked. Watching Nanzhi, the dog in a daze, her heart softened a bit. She needs to keep her dog chubby and white. I used to think that if I could skip my husband and have a cute baby, now my conditions are really worse. Kissing the dog on the forehead, Nanzhi returned to the kitchen to watch the fire. Tomorrow she will take Aunt Lu to Dongshan to pick chestnuts. She needs to pick more and put them back. The bone soup was almost cooked until midnight, and the dog was called to get up. One person drank a bowl of Nanzhi and covered the clay pot tightly. They added a few sticks of wood to the small stove before washing and sleeping. When the original owner's biological clock rang, it was only 5 o'clock in the morning, and looking at the gray Nanzhi, there was no drowsiness at all. After wiping my face and rinsing my mouth, I dug up a small bowl of black noodles in a cloth bag, and went to the kitchen to mix it with some warm bone soup and cook a pot of lump soup. Looking at the dog eating with relish, Nanzhi smashes his mouth. Is this dumpling soup really so delicious? How does it look like the dog doesn't eat the same thing as itself? Although she has also eaten rough noodles in modern times, there are still some differences between the rough noodles at that time and the black noodles now. Modern ones are only sieved less frequently and have thicker particles, but they taste fragrant. However, this ancient rough noodles taste a bit sour. Even if Nanzhi is cooked into a soup with lumps, it can only be considered palatable. I can only say that I am extremely hungry. Everything tastes delicious. After having breakfast, Nanzhi cooked 2 more sweet potatoes and 2 more potatoes before locking the door and taking his dog to Aunt Lu's house. Everyone has to keep it a secret that there is food at home now. Although there are few households in the village whose conditions are worse than their own, there are very few households willing to spend money to buy food now. If everyone else's house is gnawing on sweet potatoes and bringing out their own black noodle nest, it will definitely attract someone's malicious thoughts. It's not that Nanzhi has a dark mentality and wants to think negatively of others. It's because of the current situation that she has to be more cautious. After all, she and her dog are the only little dolls at home. Aunt Lu also woke up very early. It can be said that she didn't fall asleep all night last night. Whenever she thought about having new food at home, she was so excited that she couldn't sleep, causing both Nanzhi and the dog to be startled when they saw her. Under Mrs. Lu's eyes were a deep black circle, and her eyes were covered in red blood, making her look as if she hadn't slept for several days. "Miss Lin, are you here?" Aunt Lu perked up when she saw Nanzhi and greeted the two of them into the yard. She quickly went to wash her face. The Shen family is all having breakfast, with each person cooking sweet potatoes and half a bowl of mashed potato soup. Shen Dazhu saw Nanzhi and Goer and even invited them to sit down and eat together. "Uncle Shen, we'll eat at home," Nanzhi refused with a smile. "Whose family is having a good time now? Where can one take advantage of others?" Aunt Lu quickly tidied up herself, picked up 2 boiled potatoes, and then carried a basket with her back and followed Nanzhi towards Dongshan. It's still early now, and most of the villagers have just woken up, which makes it convenient for Nanzhi and the 3 of them to climb the mountain and not afraid of encountering anyone. "Auntie, there's something I need to tell you," Nanzhi said as she walked ahead and cut through the weeds on the roadside. "You said, I'm listening. I have told Uncle Li Zheng about the chestnut trees, and in a few days he will tell the villagers. I think there are many chestnut trees there, and now the villagers' lives are not easy, and our 2 families cannot swallow so much. It's better to tell the villagers to avoid everyone going hungry. Okay, let's pick up more in the next 2 days." Aunt Lu didn't care. After all, Nanzhi said that the chestnut forest was big, and even if she told the villagers, they had a lot of family members. They could pick up more when they came together. The dog didn't speak all the way, just carrying a small basket and following behind with a thud. He was still relishing the xiaobing, baked cake and griddle, he had last night and the pimple soup he had eaten in the morning. He had not eaten such delicious food for a long time. Even though Aunt Lu was mentally prepared, she was still startled when she arrived at the chestnut forest. The chestnut trees and patches are nowhere to be seen, and the ground is covered with fallen thorny balls. The difference between the scenery on the other side of Shishan is not ordinary. Nanzhi taught Aunt Lu how to press Li and the 3 of them to start bowing their heads and working hard. She wants to take advantage of these 2 days to pick up more chestnuts and sell them in the town. She plans to buy more grain when the price of grain has not risen enough to afford it. Her family currently has no land, and the biggest relationship between autumn harvest and her is only the difference in grain prices. With grain in hand, she is not worried. Even if grain prices may drop in the future, she is still willing to stock up on enough grain now. Seeking monthly tickets for collecting comments and recommendations, babies, end of this chapter. Chapter 10. Drinking. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. Drinking. Throughout the morning, Nanzhi weighed a total of about 40 pounds of chestnuts and sat slumped on one side, looking at the large basket full of chestnuts. The weather is too hot now, even if it's hiding under the shade of a tree or moving a little, you'll sweat all over. After coming here for 3 days, she felt like she was already smelling so bad. Nanzhi sat on the side resting, secretly disdaining herself, while Aunt Lu picked it up with great enthusiasm. Even though she was already sweating profusely, she still didn't stop her hand movements. As long as you pick up a few more chestnuts, your grandson can have more food to eat. Although I wasn't as skilled at pressing chestnuts as Nanzhi at first, after getting started for a while, I still packed a full basket all morning, weighing about 10 pounds more than what Nanzhi picked up. Miss Lin, can we carry the chestnuts back a few more times later? Aunt Lu wiped the sweat off her face, but still looked excited and not tired at all. Okay. Nanzhi felt that she was too weak, not even able to compare to a woman in her 40s. The two of them agreed to wait until noon before returning. Now the weather is scorching, and people in Lihua village have the habit of taking a nap at home at noon. They can just take advantage of that moment to go back and not be afraid of bumping into others. After 3 people had lunch, Nanzhi pulled some mother-in-law dice and wild garlic to cover her backpack. Aunt Lu followed Nanzhi's movements and pulled some wild grass to cover it. A person picked a larger leaf and covered it on their head before carrying a basket down the mountain. When she returned home, Nanzhi felt like she had lost half of her life, and the area on her shoulder that had not yet scabbed was worn out. Auntie, do we still have to go to Dongshan later? The dog looked at his own auntie's tired and exhausted appearance with some concern. Today, when Nanzhi was pressing chestnuts, the dog was helping to pick up all the smooth chestnuts. Later, because he couldn't keep up with Nanzhi's speed, he carried his small basket to the side. Picking up those chestnuts that fell on the ground, I followed suit and picked up a full basket all morning. Well, we'll have to go to Dongshan with Grandma Lu and pick up more chestnuts later, Nanzhi sighed. She wants to gather more food at home, she doesn't want to be the first person in history to starve to death. Looking at the dog covered in dust, Nanzhi now dared not even touch his face. It wasn't that she felt the dog was dirty, but rather that she herself had a slight sour smell all over her body. Thinking that Uncle Li Zheng would tell the villagers about the chestnut on Dongshan the day after tomorrow, Nanzhi shook his head and shook off the other things in his mind. She plans to go to the mountains with Aunt Lu twice more, take a good bath at home with her dog tomorrow noon, and borrow Aunt Lu's donkey cart to sell chestnuts in town for food in the afternoon. Although there are many wild chestnuts on the mountain, if the villagers knew about them, they might not be able to pick up a few pounds either. When she just returned, she looked at the river at the end of the village. Now the riverbed of the river has been exposed, and there is not much water left. She wants to search in the riverbed. After all, although it is dry now, there must still be some fish in the river. Moreover, she has searched in the original owner's memory, and it seems that the people here do not have a habit of eating fish. Otherwise, even if the original owner went to the river to salvage it, he might not have starved to death. After taking a break at home for a while, Aunt Lu knocked on the door. Even if she wanted to slack off, Nanzhi, a thin and small dog, only gritted her teeth and stood up. The sun was scorching hot, and Nanzhi felt dizzy and swollen. After finally entering Dongshan and under the shade of trees, Nanzhi felt a little better. Nanzhi always has a premonition that it won't rain before the autumn harvest. Even after the autumn harvest, there may not be a drop of rain. Nanzhi felt a bit overwhelmed all afternoon, and Aunt Lu brought a basket with her. Seeing that Aunt Lu had already filled it all, Nanzhi's weight was less than 30 pounds. Miss Lin, what's wrong with you? Mrs. Lu looked at Nanzhi with some concern. Lin, who is now with her orphaned and widowed dog, didn't know what to do if she didn't take advantage of the situation and pick up more chestnuts. No, it's okay. Nanzhi waved her hand, feeling that she might have some heatstroke. There is no Huxiang Jingqi water here. If heatstroke is severe, I'm afraid I might have died of heatstroke before starving. Aunt Lu didn't believe Nanzhi's words, and looking at her empty demeanor, she was afraid she might have been drinking. Miss Lin, did you get drunk? Nanzhi didn't answer in a daze, staring at the tree above him in a daze. By the time she regained consciousness, it had already been half an hour, and she looked at Nanzhi, the dog lying asleep on top of her, feeling a bit confused. She remembers pressing Chestnuts, how could she fall asleep? Aunt Lu came over to take the dog away when she saw Nanzhi wake up. Wake up. You're drunk now, I'll give you a headache. Just go back and rest a little longer. After speaking, he put the dog on the empty ground and continued to press down on the chestnuts. Seeing that her backpack was already filled, Nanzhi was momentarily moved in her heart. Just as I was about to get up, I felt a little pain in the corners of my hands. I pulled out my sleeves and found that both corners were black and purple, which looked very scary. She was stunned for a moment before remembering how the old man had taught her that if she didn't have a scraping board and oil, she would have to pull her neck and bend her hands, which could alleviate the symptoms of heatstroke. Thank you very much, Aunt Lu. Nanzhi spoke very seriously, and Aunt Lu saved her life. What's up, it's just a matter of holding hands. Aunt Lu shook her head and continued with her hand movements. If you want to thank me, it's me who should thank you. These chestnuts are life-saving things. Nanzhi did not refute, only jotted down Aunt Lu's feelings in her heart. In fact, she told Aunt Lu that she also had ulterior motives. After all, even if she kept it a secret about the chestnut forest, as long as it didn't rain, someone would always come to Dongshan to find food. As long as someone comes to Dongshan, such a large chestnut forest will definitely not be hidden. It's better to speak out first. Tell Aunt Lu that firstly, if she wants to go to the town, she will definitely borrow donkey carts frequently, which is not always shameless. Secondly, Aunt Lu helps her family the most and happens to repay the debt. It was still early, and Nanzhi rested for a while before secretly carrying the chestnuts back home with Aunt Lu, and then continued into the mountains. The three of them were all in a hurry, but no one noticed Wu Shi following behind them. Wu originally intended to take advantage of the lack of people in the well at the village entrance to fetch more water and go home. However, she happened to see Aunt Lu and Nanzhi carrying baskets and walking towards the back mountain. Suddenly, I had a thought and secretly followed behind. There used to be wolves in Dongshan, and she didn't believe that Nanzhi would be willing to take her dog to die. Moreover, Aunt Lu followed with a backpack, maybe there was something good on Dongshan. With an idea in mind, Wu secretly followed behind all the way until she saw the chestnut forest and realized she had discovered a big secret. She said that Nanzhi's cheap skin must not be a good person, but Aunt Lu seems to be so kind in her daily life. Isn't she hiding such a big chestnut forest now and not telling them? After secretly spitting, Wu sneaked down the mountain again. If she had gone back and told her mother-in-law about it, she would definitely praise her. With a joyful heart, Wu ran down the mountain all the way, afraid of being scolded again if she returned late. Not to mention how proud Wu is, both Nanzhi Zheng and Aunt Lu are still working hard. Seeking monthly tickets for collecting comments and recommendations. Babies, end of this chapter.